I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Sarah Torbert, and I am the State 4-H Volunteer Development Specialist. I really want to thank Extension Administration for allowing me to come and speak today about the introduction of an educational reform for the Wyoming 4-H program. My goal today is to start by overviewing what the reform looks like, talk to you a little about the data that drove us to get to this point of wanting reform, the literature that we reviewed to show the need for reform, introduction to participants and stakeholders involved with the process, the context of the reform, the mission, values, and experience of the 4-H program and how the reform relates to that, then how we plan to implement the reform, evaluation of the reform, barriers that we might face, and then the recommendations moving forward. At the end, I'll also provide you with references in case there's more information that you want to look for. So the educational reform idea is to eliminate traditional 4-H club meetings and replace them with project-based learning experiences. Currently in the Wyoming 4-H program, most of our club work is done in a 4-H club where young people of all ages come to a meeting. During that meeting, they use parliamentary procedure to get through a set agenda that will include things like fundraising, activities they want to participate in, reporting, demonstrations, some project reports and leader reports about what's happening throughout the county, and then usually it ends with some type of snack and kids go home. There's a wide base of what a traditional club looks like within the Wyoming 4-H program throughout the United States. And normally we'll find, and you'll see that the research will show this, that kids don't necessarily enjoy a traditional club meeting and are really in 4-H for the project-based learning experiences. So to kind of show that, I want to start by giving you some data of the Wyoming 4-H program that kind of led us to this reform. So first of all, we use the data from 4-H Online, which is our enrollment system. The enrollment system kind of looks at a wide base of information, including demographics, addresses, project involvement, basically what kind of things the kids want to do. So if you look here, you can see that in 2012 and to 2013, from year 1 to year 2, our 8-year-olds that enrolled were 646 8-year-olds. Then coming back the next year, we only had 474 9-year-olds, just to show that we lost that many members in that age group from 2012 to 2013. You can see the numbers are very similar. In 2013 to 2014, started out with 657 of those 8-year-olds, and the next year, when they were 9-year-olds, there was only 492 of them. And you can see as they get older, it just kind of decreases for first-year members. We don't have a lot of 17-year-old first-year members, and when they come back, there is less of them also. So kind of another way to look at the same data is you can see that statistically, or looking percentage-wise, from 2012 to 2013, we lost 44% of our first and second year members combined. And then in 2013 to 2014, it was 42%. So we're losing almost half of our members from their first to second year 4-H involvement. You can then see kind of like tapers off. We're then down to about 20% until we get to the 9th and 10th year of their 4-H program, which means those are kids who started when they were 8. And at that point in time are 17 and 18. A lot of them are going to college or getting jobs and aren't able to complete their 4-H experience. So that's why the number increases a little bit there at the end. But you can see that if we can keep them past year 2, our retention numbers tend to go up. And so we need to figure out a way to help those increase. Just one more slide that kind of shows how this will be beneficial to the 4-H program. You can see if you look at 2014, the blue line is our actual enrollment of young people. And this was their first year members. There were 1,969 members enrolled in first year in the 4-H program in 2014. The actual enrollment was 7,155 members. But then if we had that same 44% trajectory from 2012 to 2014 that we saw in the previous slide, you can see that that first year we would lose almost 900 members, and then it would slowly taper off to that about 20% from the second year up until the 11th year. So if we could work as a 4-H system to make that 44% half, 22%, ideally it'd be 0%, but realistically, if we can work to figure out how to keep them enrolled in that first year, you can see that it would increase our membership We would have had, instead of having 7,000 members this in 2014, we would have had over 11,000 members. So almost 4,000 kids would have stayed actively enrolled in the 4-H program. We also find that once you lose them, it's really hard to get them back because they probably didn't have a positive or an experience that met their expectations. So in turn, we really need to work hard during that first year to keep our members engaged and enrolled in 4-H. So when we saw this information starting back in 2012, we've kind of been following it and the trend continues. We did try a few projects in 2015, 2016 to help increase retention, including giving backpacks to new members. But we really wanted to look more as to the why of the 4-H membership retention problems. And so in 2014, a study was started by the University of California on youth retention. The Wyoming 4-H program joined this study, I believe, in 2016. We can look at that next. But yeah, so in 2016, 2017, we did our first youth retention survey in the state of Wyoming. And we've continued that ever since to kind of see what our membership issues are and how we can work to fix those and change those. The survey has 9 parts, and I think there are a few that are really more important to the reform issue than others. So the things I'm gonna show you today, the results of are why I joined 4-H, the best part of 4-H, the changes they like to make in the 4-H program, and a reason that they might not return. Because I think they kind of shed some light on maybe why it's important for us to move from a traditional club to a project-based learning experience. So first of all, when members were asked why they joined 4-H, the number one thing they said, over half of them, is that they wanted to try new things. You can see here that obviously they could have picked more than one because it doesn't add up to 100. So kids could pick as many of the options as they wanted to, but trying new things was the most important. They also wanted to have fun. A lot of them had a family history. That's why I joined 4-H. And they were looking to build some skills. But you can see that trying new things and skill building are directly related to project-based learning because that's where they're going to get those two things accomplished. When looking at what they thought the best part of 4-H was, the top one was the project activities. So once again, that is another huge reason why we need to move from traditional clubs to project-based learning. They also said fair and showing animals, which is very similar and can be related to project-based learning, new people and friendships, and then learning opportunities. So 3 of the top 4 are directly related or could be directly related to project-based learning. What would they change about 4-H? And this was an open-ended question, so I find that this, even 20% is a very large population if you didn't even have a list of things to choose from. So 20% of them said that they would change meetings. I mean, on a good note, 19% said they would change nothing, and then 12 and 10 said that there was a lack of organization and communication issues. And that's something I also think that long-term, the idea of going from a traditional club to a project-based learning experience could also change. So why they might not come back, they said they didn't feel connected to other youth. And I think that we could talk about how project-based learning could help that because they could feel connected to someone who has very similar interests as them. While we all are in 4-H within a club, you may have some kids that like sheep and some kids that like woodworking and some kids that want to learn about arts and crafts. And if you were all in an experience that was similar, you may feel easier connected to other youth within your program. They don't have time. I'm not sure that project-based learning clubs can change that. However, I do think that if we can make this the thing they want to spend their time on, that one also could decrease. And they didn't know when the club or project meeting met. And that's once again some of the communication pieces that we need to also put in place in addition to the reform of eliminating traditional clubs for project-based learning experiences. Additionally, there's some literature that can kind of support this idea. When looking at the literature, there were 3 major questions that I thought it would be important to answer. One was why youth join 4-H or why they stay. 2 is why they leave. And 3 is what's the benefits of hands-on learning experiences, kind of even going beyond the 4-H program at that point. So what I found was that the reason why you join or stay in 4-H or most clubs is one is they want to try new things and participate in projects. And I think the key word there is the word projects and participate. That's what they want to do. They enjoy being engaged in high quality learning experiences. They also want programs that are fun and engaging, ways that they can get involved and stay involved. And then they want an opportunity to develop a relationship with adult mentors. The reason why youth leave the 4-H program is that they find that there are poor meetings and a poor environment. They also don't learn as much as they expected they were going to learn, so they had some type of expectation that they weren't able to follow through with that. They don't find meetings fun. In fact, some of the surveys directly said that meetings are boring and 4-H is not fun. The importance of hands-on learning I found was that it really allowed for youth to experience situations that can't be found in a formal classroom setting. So if you think about it, it's a real life situation. Where am I going to, I'm going to be able to use this at home, at a future job, when I'm hanging out with my friends versus something in the classroom which may not seem or be applicable to my everyday life. They also found that project-based learning allows for critical thinking, problem solving, collaborative work, and engaging in learning. And if you look at the kinds of skill sets that employers today are looking for, you will find that those are the buzzwords that are out there these days. Critical thinking, problem solving, collaborative work. I mean, those are the kind of things that employers are looking for from college graduates. And so in turn, I think it's really cool that we can start young people at the age of 8 getting involved with project-based learning and carrying that out till they enter the workforce through 4-H. And then also hands-on learning leads to project sustainability. So if young people are involved with something, they're more likely to stay active and engaged. And I think that once again helps to solve some of those retention issues that we looked at previously. So what's the context of this educational reform? So the context is that we really need to think about where we came from. While traditional clubs are the current method of delivery for the 4-H program, the 4-H program really started with project-based learning. So a little history lesson, I'll make it brief, of the 4-H program is that it started in 1902 with corn clubs for boys and canning clubs for girls. So the idea of extension is that extension agents in the county take research-based information from land-grant universities and they distribute those to the people with common practices in their counties. And so what was happening back in 1902 is hybrid corn was becoming something that was new, that a lot of research was being done at universities, and they wanted to get that in the hands of the American farmer to help him grow better crops. However, extension educators found that there was some resistance from adults to be able to want to do that, and so they turned to young people, gave them hybrid corn or new canning methods to see if what they could do with those. And if you have ever seen them, and I should have put a picture in here, but there are these pictures of young men sitting on tops of huge piles of corn. And the idea is that the hybrid corn yielded way better than they ever thought it would and better than their parents did. And so we started with corn clubs for boys where they were growing corn and comparing them to each other. That's kind of where the fair mentality came in. And canning clubs for girls where they're canning tomatoes is the one that started and trying to do practices that decrease the amount of botulism that was happening in tomato canning and bringing those to the fair and comparing them to their friends. And of course, 4-H grew to include animals and robotics and computers and all kinds of different things. But the idea is that young people are learning through research-based information, best practices within things that they're interested in. So I think it warrants us returning to project-based learning because it is our roots and where we started. In Wyoming and throughout most of the United States, clubs are the current delivery model for the 4-H program. The great thing about clubs is that they do allow for the development of life skills, leadership, service learning, and group decision-making. Once again, some of those buzzwords that we talked about before. However, we're finding that kids are really bored and don't enjoy going to club meetings. Project learning is why youth and parents join 4-H. If you ask someone why they join 4-H, it's to show an animal, maybe learn how to ride a horse, learn how to take better pictures, learn to sew, learn to cook. It isn't to get together, do some parliamentary procedure, or do some fundraising. I mean, who literally wants to join something because they want to do fundraising, but they join because they want to learn projects. Looking at my own situation, I have 2 young people that are involved in the 4-H program, and sometimes we have to coerce them or coax them to go to 4-H meetings, like club meetings. But when we get to do a project work like shooting sports or working with our pigs or anything like that, they are there in an instant and have very little grumbling that goes on when that happens. So I think there's, I can speak from personal experience, and you can see that the research said that really what you strive and thrive at is that project-based learning. So when we're looking at this educational reform, who's going to have to be involved? Well, number one, our 4-H members need to be involved. They're the ones that are affected by this most. The good news, I think, is that they're the ones who are going to benefit from this the most, also because they're going to be engaged in something that they truly enjoy, and it will help us to keep them in the program so that they can gain those skills that we talked about earlier in the presentation. Of course, we're going to have to get our 4-H volunteers on board too, and this is maybe where I think we might struggle a bit more, especially with that second group of 4-H volunteers listed. I call them the seasoned volunteers, the ones who were in 4-H as a kid, their parents were in 4-H, 4-H has always been run this way, we've always done it this way, we can't do it any differently, and we hear that often. And so I think we're going to really have to help them see some of those things that we talked about in the data and the lit review as the reason why this is an important concept. Of course, we have parents, and some of them serve in that role of 4-H volunteer also, and so there's kind of a dual process there, but parents get our kids to the meetings, they keep them there, they keep them in line. I mean, how many of us are chauffeuring our kids around no matter if it's 4-H or any other experience? Then also our 4-H staff. We have a couple key staff, our county-based educators, so every county, as you know, in Wyoming has a staff member, including 2 in Campbell and Lincoln County and 1 at the Wind River Reservation. And so they need to be on board with this because they're going to be the ones who are going to be our cheerleaders to make this happen. They also have to have the tools they need to make it happen so they feel like they can be successful. And then there's those of us that work at the state 4-H office. We need to be on board and we need to help them to implement change and provide them with the tools they need to be able to do that. Of course, there's all of you, the Extension Administration. I think that you're also one of the keys because you do serve as the, excuse me, the HR department for our county-based educators. You do their reviews, you set up their expectations, their county goals. And so I think we all need to be on board because this needs to be a total overhaul of our program. And if we don't have some type of person to help check on them and make sure they're doing okay besides the state 4-H staff, I think it won't be a successful program. And then of course, there's all the people involved in our counties and our communities, and those are our stakeholders because they're in turn, there's a couple of things happening. We're finding that our program is helping to create young people who are successful citizens, who are becoming leaders in the community. The community is also involved in so many ways in donations, fundraising, helping our program grow. And so we really need to be cognizant of what's going on there and help them to better understand why this is important and get their blessing and their support to do this. So I think there's also, this relates really closely to our mission. And I think this is the mission of the Wyoming 4-H program is to empower youth to reach their full potential by working and learning in partnership with caring adults. So the great news is that even though this isn't currently what's happening, I think it is in direct line with our mission statement. So the idea of project-based learning is basically, the idea of project-based learning is basically that young people choose a project they're really excited about, visual arts, sewing, sheep, swine, whatever it happens to be, and then they would be able to meet with other kids that are interested in that, and they would do all of their 4-H work around something that they're completely interested in. They may have 3 different project-based learning experiences. They may have a shooting sports one, a swine one, and a visual arts one that they go to. But in turn, they're engaged in something where they're doing hands-on learning versus maybe sitting in a meeting and listening. And so they're definitely learning, they're definitely working, and in order for this to be successful, our projects are going to have to be led or guided by adults. And so I think we are able to definitely reach and support our mission through project-based learning. Similarly, I think we're able to support our vision. And so here you can kind of see the vision of the 4-H program is to develop a world in which youth and adults learn and grow and work together as a catalyst for positive change. So this might be a little bit more of a stretch, but I think that if we can instill in our volunteers the importance of that positive change, this could happen within the 4-H program also. So this vision is supported by formal and non-formal community-focused experiential learning, definitely happening in project-based learning. Youth are developing lifelong skills, and I think this will be something we really have to develop tools to make sure that project-based learning is not only doing project skills, but also some of those life skills that we talked about, leadership, collaborative work, critical thinking. And I think that could easily happen as long as we develop the tools to make that happen. We're fostering leadership and volunteerism in youth and adults. We're strengthening families and communities, and we're using research-based knowledge available from our land grants and other sources. So I think, well, maybe this is a little bit more of a stretch. I think as long as we have the tools in place to explain how these can be implemented into a project-based learning experiences, our mission and our vision can both be supported. One of my favorite parts of the Wyoming 4-H program is the youth experience and how it's defined. We are one of the few states in the United States that actually sits down and says, this is what you're going to gain from joining the 4-H program. And I think that moving to project-based learning is really going to help us to actually provide what we're promising, or put our money where our mouth is. So look, if you see this here, the opportunity to set goals, record keep, and reflect on their learning experiences in a project area. So hopefully that's happening or can happen at a project-based learning experience. An adult that's going to provide the support needed to develop life skills through project work. It's right there. Opportunity for hands-on learning, a place to publicly display their learning or show others, and then the opportunity to use the skills they learn at a higher level, whether it's county, state, regional, national, international. So I'm almost shocked that we haven't moved to this sooner, because really if the experience that we're saying we're providing to youth is almost all based on project learning. And so this is an important thing to do in order to provide what we're promising in our youth experience clause. So how are we going to do this? What's the action plan? I think the first thing is we need to get the support of Extension Administration to move forward with this educational reform. I feel that that's really important, once again, because you are the boss of our 4-H educators. They look to you for guidance, and so we all need to be on the same page and supportive of this movement. Second, we need to involve our 4-H educators in planning what we're going to do. 4-H is a grassroots organization. It starts from the bottom and moves its way up. People in the counties don't know who I am. Very few of them know anybody but either their club leader or their 4-H educator. So we really need to work to make sure that they're involved in how this is going to be implemented and rolled out within their counties. It also is going to give us more support at the grassroots level. You're more likely to believe somebody that you work with daily and you appreciate their knowledge than you're going to if somebody from a higher level just says you need to do this. So we need to help them figure out how to sunset our traditional clubs and replace them with project-based learning experiences. One thing that we can do and help that is, once again, I said in Teton County, Jackson, we do have concrete examples of how this has worked. So I think we can use those examples to help them see how this could be successful. We also need to develop a plan that includes how project-based learning is going to develop valuable life skills. That's the one thing that I think traditional 4-H clubs do really well. And I think it's the one thing people are scared to lose if we sunset the traditional clubs. And so if we can explain, or if we can help people see how that will happen and put that within the plan of how these project-based learning experiences will work, I think it's a much easier reform to have people buy into and implement. From there, I think we need to survey our club leaders. I mean, they're the ones that are going to be affected by this, to gain new information about how this can be successful. We don't want to feel like we're cutting their feet out from underneath them and not using them anymore, but we want to help them experience what this can look like and what their role can be within the reform. I also think it's important to hold some focus groups. While surveys are great, it's good to see people one-on-one and get some really good feedback and be able to explain answers that maybe don't make sense in a survey. So those focus groups could be held with our community partners, our 4-H members directly, and then 4-H volunteers, parents, to gain a better perspective of what the process and implementation looks like from our perspective and from theirs. I also think the state 4-H office, in conjunction with the 4-H educators throughout the county, are going to need to develop some really successful tools, agendas, meeting outlines as to what it looks like, what kind of things can happen and should happen at meeting 1, meeting 2, meeting 3, that are project-based learning experiences. And then I think the next step is, once those tools are in place, then we need to look to 3 counties, which has kind of been our go-to in the past for implementing change, to implement this idea of project-based learning. And maybe we use Teton as our baseline and then have 2 or 3 other counties implement the idea of switching from traditional clubs to project-based learning. We can do that without maybe having all 500 clubs change. If we have 3 counties, 60, 70 clubs change, it's a lot easier for us to say, this didn't work, let's fix this before we roll this out to all 500 clubs that we're working with. I then think it is important to have the 4-H educators in the test counties share their successes and concerns with the rest of the 4-H educators. I also think this is once again that same mentality. If somebody who's doing the same work as you tells you it's going to be okay, this is what we need to change, it's much more easy to accept it and to move on than if a bunch of people from the top down are saying this is what you need to change. So having those people say, this worked really well in my county, it was fun, it was so exciting, it went really well, I just think we need to change a few things, is going to definitely create some more calm before the storm. And then I think at some point, this is scary to say, but we just need to rip that Band-Aid off and make the change in 4-H programming using all the information we gained from all the steps that were part of this action plan. At some point, we need to make sure that we just do it, because otherwise I think it's something that we could keep talking about for years and years and years, and if we don't do it, it will never get done. So once the program has been implemented, either in those 3 counties or statewide, I think we need to monitor our retention numbers to see if it's helping. Our goal is to increase membership, and so if we can increase membership through simple change or maybe a major change like this, I think we're going to be successful. So we need to monitor our retention numbers, because that's one of the things that led us to this point through the data we showed you earlier. Then we need to follow up with 4-H educators on what's happening in counties. We do monthly meetings with them, and so I think this needs to become either part of that agenda or a separate agenda, a separate meeting item where we really just talk about how things are going and ask for the tools that they need to continue to implement this change. What other things need to be developed to give them to help our club leaders and our 4-H educators implement change. I also think it'd be important to follow up with some focus groups with members and volunteers to hear the successes and frustrations directly from them. Once again, surveys are great, but if you can really talk to those people, and we do have a 4-H staff presence in every county that can help to lead some of those discussions, I think it'd be easy to do that. Long term, I think we also need to follow up with member learning through 4-H projects. And this may be a 5 to 10 year study just to see that life skill development is still happening, and maybe even in a more positive way than it was through traditional club programming. The barriers, they're small, but I think they're big. So one of the barriers I think that we're really going to run into is tradition. The 4-H program has been around over 100 years, and so there's a lot of things that are done because they were done and have always been done. I think of the clubs where every member has to give a demonstration. When I was 8, many years ago, the same principles applied. When my dad was 8, many years before that, the same principles applied. So I think we've just been living so much on we've always done it this way that it's really hard for people to break away from tradition. A couple of months ago, I had the opportunity to present a workshop on maybe how clubs could change from not doing Robert's Rules of Order for parliamentary procedure, but maybe to more of a group decision-making process. And people were, trying to figure out how to take that group decision-making process we were talking about and fit Robert's Rules of Order in it, because that's the way that they've always done it. And so I think it's just a really hard sell, because people in 4-H, especially those seasoned volunteers or those alumni, people whose families were involved, really get stuck and hung up on that idea of tradition. And I have a hard time seeing the difference, not because they don't believe in it, but because it's so different than what they're used to. I also think our structure makes it a little bit hard to implement change. We do deal with 23 different counties in the Wind River Reservation that all have different needs and sets of staff and sets of volunteers that all do things differently. So doing an overall statewide structural change can be scary for people, because they don't see how it can work in their county. Yes, it may work in that county, or that person may be able to do it, but these are the things that are happening in my county that don't make it possible. And so we really need to help our educators in our counties think through how we can eliminate their personal barriers just to make it happen. So our structure, because we're so different in we have basically 24 different programs, and within that county there may be 20 or 30 different clubs that have different ways of doing things. We really need to be thoughtful in how we present this and help people think through that. Once again, the barriers, those are the only 2 I have. They're not terrible, but I think that they have a lot of once again, tradition that comes with them. And so we really need to help talk people through what that looks like on an individual basis, because everybody's situation might be different. So what do we do next? Like, what's the next step once we get the support of the Extension Administration to move forward with this? First, I think we need to develop what a project-based learning experience model looks like. We have a model for what a 4-H club looks like and the parts of a 4-H club that should be happening. Basically a club wheel that says that you should spend 20 minutes on business, 20 minutes on learning, and 20 minutes on recreation for an hour-long meeting. We don't have anything of what that looks like for a project-based learning experience club. And so I think that we really, and it could look very similar, but I think there needs to be some intention put into what that looks like as we present this idea out to the rest of the state. Next, I think we need to develop tools for successful project-based learning that can be implemented before the reform takes place. So the good news is that we're already doing projects as part of a separate experience from a traditional club meeting. And so I think there's some things that we can develop, and we've actually been working on the State 4-H office to make that happen. For instance, we know that swine is one of our largest projects. There's, I think over 1,000 kids are involved in the swine project. However, we don't have a lot of volunteers in Wyoming. There's not a lot of swine producers. So we don't have a lot of volunteers that know how to teach young people about swine. So we're looking to develop a 3-year curriculum that basically says, year 1, these are the topics you should cover. These are some activities you can do with young people. Year 2, these are the activities, topics you should cover. These are some activities you could do with young people that are really geared at that 8, 9, 10-year-old range where we're losing kids. And so if we can develop similar ones for other projects to really help them be successful in that project learning and get that hype up around that, I think it'll really help us to implement change in the future. And then I also think it's important for us to share a similar presentation like this with our 4-H educators and stakeholders. There are some clout in that data. There's some successes in the things that are happening through the California study. If we can help people see why it's important for us to do this in order to help members stay involved and engaged in 4-H, I think we can even get those traditional people to see the importance of it. Most of the traditional people are involved in 4-H because they had an amazing experience. It changed their life in some way, shape, or form. And right now we're losing, like this year in the Wyoming 4-H program, we lost like over 300 8-year-olds, and they didn't come back the next year. And so helping those traditionalists see that 300 kids could have had that same experience you did if we just would have changed the way we program could really help us to increase how we move forward in the 4-H program. Hopefully you see the importance and the need for educational reform. Here are some references that I used for this presentation that really help to solidify why we need to move from a traditional club model to project-based learning to best serve the young people in the Wyoming 4-H program in a positive manner. I'm more than willing to take any questions or entertain any thoughts you might have related to this as we move forward to make this happen, to make the best better for our young people in Wyoming 4-H. Thank you.